This windmill stands at the Rhineland Museum in Kommern. 1973. 4 wings mounted on 2 massive oak beams. At the cap, the head of the mill, those beams cross inside the axle in a fixed pattern. A heavy timber frame at the rear lets the entire cap, wings and all, rotate to face the wind directly. That is not cosmetic. The force of the wind travels down the axle into the machinery inside the mill. Wind becomes motion. Motion becomes power. Everything else in this film is how that connection gets built. This is the same mill, before the wings were mounted. The axle head at the roof sits ready to receive both oak beams. Into these 2 openings, the beams must be drawn. Nothing is attached yet. Everything you are about to see starts from this empty frame. The first beam lies on the ground. The millwright and his assistants fasten one end of a block and tackle to it. Block and tackle and a hand-driven ground winch, the erdwinde, take the place of a modern crane. With these simple tools alone, the beam will be drawn up to the roof of the mill. The men assemble the winch, a wooden frame fitted with a matching axle piece. While they work, a second rope is attached, one that will let them steer the beam and keep it aligned as it rises. 2 sturdy wooden poles transfer the men's muscle power into the winch itself. The lift is about to begin. The men start hauling the first beam upward. A deflection pulley redirects the pulling rope in the direction they need. As the assistants keep turning the winch, the beam slowly lifts clear of the ground. At the lower loose pulley of the block and tackle hangs the full load being raised. Step by step, turn by turn, the men take in the rope through the ground winch alone. The steering rope, attached earlier, keeps the beam held in the correct position as it climbs. There is no motor here, no engine. Just rope, wood, and repeated turning until 14 meters of oak leaves the ground entirely. At last, the tip of the beam reaches the axle head. Here, the millwright levers it into the opening of the Wellenkopf, the wave head, the heart of the axle. If the tip protrudes slightly too far past the axle head opening, the millwright must fix the beam provisionally. He does this with an iron rod pushed through a hole drilled in the very tip of the beam. This is necessary because the block and tackle has shortened as far as it can go. It must be pulled apart and reset. For this, the assistant releases the pulley from the center of the beam and reattaches it at the lower end instead. The lift is about to continue, this time from a new point of leverage. As the ground winch turns further, the beam is pushed deeper into the Wellenkopf. The assistant connects the chain to the pulley of the rope hoist. Now the men can operate the winch again until the beam protrudes a little further out from the opening in the axle head. Then the millwright drives in the dollen, the wooden peg that will later serve to anchor the wings themselves. Slowly, the beam slides through the box-like guide channel built into the axle head. Finally, the beam reaches its final seat. Now the millwright must wedge it firmly into place. On only 2 sides, the millwright drives in the wooden wedges. On the remaining 2 sides, the beam must sit flush against the opening of the Wellenkopf, as can be seen here from the window of the cap on the left side of the frame. To drive wedges into the side now facing downward, the millwright rotates the beam 90 degrees. The oak beam is fixed with wedges on the same spot, on both sides, 1 rotation at a time. Here, visible clearly, the front opening of the Wellenkopf reserved for the second beam. The second beam lies on the ground, ready. For test purposes, wings have already been attached to it. Every wing consists of a narrow voorhek covered edge to edge with solid boards, and a wide hinterhek, which, because of its cross-slatted wooden rungs, looks like a ladder. The connecting piece between front and rear is the root, the beam that will carry both sections up to the mill. Before that can happen, the wing pair must be taken apart again. First, the men remove the wind boards from the voorhek. Iron bands hold beam and wing together. Once these bands are loosened, the wings can be carefully lifted off. The beam itself is made of oak, a wood chosen specifically for its stability and long life. In total, it measures 14 meters. With a chisel, the assistants remove the dollen from the beam core. Then they attach the lower pulley of the block and tackle to it. Using the ground winch, the men take in the pulling rope, one end fixed to the load, one end fixed to the mill axle itself. Slowly, the beam lifts off the ground. Turning the winch shortens the entire rope run, and the load rises accordingly. A second millwright directs the work from below. After further turning, the beam already reaches past the Vettenkopf. Once again, it is secured with the iron rod to prevent it sliding back. The block and tackle has become too short. The assistant reattaches it at the lower end of the beam. After more hauling, the millwright drives in the dollen. Then he brings the beam into the correct position for wedging. The second beam is fixed at two sides of the axle head, exactly as the first one was. The same process, the same patience. 14 more meters of oak locked into place. From the ground, the mill's brake is released to turn the beam into a horizontal line. This particular mill originally came from Lower Saxony, what is called an Achtkantmühle, an 8-sided mill. Historians consider it the forerunner of the stone tower windmills built especially across the Rhineland during the 19th century. This is not simply craftwork being repeated. It is architectural history, rebuilt beam by beam, wedge by wedge. As soon as the front beam stands horizontal, the millwright can drive in further wooden wedges. Building a mill required a millwright to master many completely different trades. For that reason, apprentices trained for 5 years, learning wheelwright work, lathe turning, and carpentry, all within a single apprenticeship. Once both beams are firmly wedged into the Vellenkopf, the two wing pairs can be attached to them one after another. Every wing is not built flat. It is deliberately slightly curved. The exact measurement behind that curve was the closely guarded secret of every millwright. No two mills were built from an identical formula. The wings, too, are raised using the ground winch and the block and tackle. For this, only 2 men are needed at the winch, far fewer than for the heavy oak beams. The wings must be stable but light. The millwright usually chose pine or spruce. Pitch pine and larch could also be used in wing construction. The sail cross-mounted on the Vellenkopf captures the movement of the wind. The mill shaft, the axle, transfers that force to a system of gears inside the mill. That is how one or more grinding mechanisms inside the mill receive their driving power. The wing reaches its seat on the beam. Now the millwright's assistant can join beam and wing together. On the ground, helpers prevent the wing from slipping. 3 men together make sure that the upper end of the wing sits exactly against the Vellenkopf. Once it sits correctly, the rest of the wing must be brought forward to snap into the dollen. Then the millwright's assistant connects wing and beam with iron bands. Clearly visible here, how the wing rests directly on the beam. Every wing is mounted with 2 bands fastened tight to the beam. On the ground, the iron bands lie ready for assembly. Through the dollen and the iron bands together, beam and wing gain a stable connection, one that will hold through years of wind and weather. The first wing is now fastened to the beam. The mill shaft turns further to receive the second wing. For this, the ground winch is used once again. The wings are mounted in reverse order. The men carry the counterpart to the first wing up toward the mill. This mill originally stood in Kantrup, a village near Osnabrück. It is one of the few structures in this open-air museum that did not originate in the Rhineland itself. Every windmill in the Rhineland stands under historic preservation. None may be demolished. After the Second World War, the Kantrup mill saw little use. Wind-powered milling no longer paid for itself. In 1969, it was taken apart. 2 years later, it was rebuilt here in this open-air museum. By now, the second wing has also been raised. It must snap firmly into the dollen. Iron bands connect beam and wing together. This wing pair, mounted on the outer opening of the axle head, is called the Feldrauten, the field wings. The ground winch turns the mill shaft further to bring the wings onto the inner opening. Those are called the Hausrauten, the house wings. Before mounting the Hausruten, the men take a break. Then the next wing must be raised. The millwright's trade was also called Mühlenarzte, mill doctors. It was a traveling profession. Often the millwrights did not return home for weeks at a time because their customers lived far apart in remote regions. Larger jobs, building a roof, mounting a full sail cross, were never carried out in a home workshop, always on site, always at the mill itself. All the wings but one are now fully mounted. On each wing, you can clearly make out the narrow voorhek and the wide hinterhek. In total, each wing measures roughly 12 meters long and 2 meters wide. The sailcross is one of the most sensitive parts of the entire windmill. Here, the most frequent and most expensive repairs occur. Storms and thunderstorms especially can shorten a wing's lifespan. That is why windmillers always watch the weather very closely, so they can take the wind off the wings in time. The final wing is raised. As you can see in the foreground, the tip of this wing has a slight angled twist, what is called the top. Without the top, a wing does not properly use the force of the wind. In the language of millwrights, a wing without it is said to let the wind shoot through. Wasted force, wasted power. In total, the men need 2 full days to completely mount a sailcross. Good wooden wings have a lifespan of 10 to 15 years. This particular mill, the Kommern mill, has a modern cast iron axle head instead of a wooden one. The number 1903 cast into the axle head points to the year it was made. The mill itself is older still. On the ground wooden lamellae wait, the slats that will finally make the wings operational. This mill has so-called Jalousseeflügel, louvered wings. Unlike Segelflügel, sail wings, which the miller covers with canvas for milling, Jalousseeflügel are built from movable wooden flaps. At the hinterhek, the men must screw these flaps down on both sides. The individual flaps are made of wood and mounted to a Zugstange, a long wooden control rod. Because every single flap is connected to that rod, the entire row of louvers can be opened and closed together. Another flap is handed up to the millwright and his assistant. First, the men fit it into the hinterhek. Then the assistant screws the joint of the flap to the control rod. Meanwhile, the millwright wedges the louver between the outer strut of the hinterhek and an additional lath, which he then screws firmly in place. The control rod continues through another joint at the axle head into the interior of the mill. This way, the miller can regulate the wind-catching surface entirely from inside the mill, without ever having to climb outside. This particular wing system spread widely across Germany starting around 1900. It belongs to a series of inventions that millwrights and engineers developed throughout the 19th and 20th centuries to make better use of the wind. In the end, wind power could not withstand the new energy sources of the industrial age. Steam engines, later electric and diesel motors, took over from the 19th century onward the place once held by wind and water power. At the latest, after the Second World War, most Rhineland windmillers gave up milling entirely. With that, the millwrights themselves lost their livelihood. The few millwrights who still master the old techniques now restore the surviving mills that today stand under historic protection. Knowledge that once supported an entire regional trade now survives in the hands of a handful of specialists. The louvered flaps are now mounted on all 4 wings. Using a chain, the millwright releases the brake of the mill. In one final operation, he checks the correct balance of the sailcross. The wings turn, lightly, evenly. For this time, the millwright's work is finished. 14 meters of oak twice over. 4 wings, 12 meters each. 2 full days of labor. Wind becomes motion. Motion becomes power. Because once these skills are gone, the wedge, the dollen, the Zugstange, the millwright's secret measurement for a wing's curve, all that remains is the record. Subscribe. More of these trades are coming.